Playwright Anton Chekhov famously said, "Never place a loaded rifle on stage if it isn't going to go off." In other words, every detail must be relevant, and every setup should have a payoff. Thus, the narrative principle of Chekhov's gun was born. But it isn't always a gun. Chekhov's Whatever is a podcast where myself and guests watch a movie and try to predict what role Chekhov's gun will play. Welcome to Chekhov's Whatever. Hello and welcome to Chekhov's Whatever, the podcast that makes a game of movies and storytelling. I'm your host, Meg Mazeski. Here with me today to talk about the 2025 gothic horror film Frankenstein is Apryl Markham. Welcome to the podcast, Apryl.
Hi, Meg. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you join the podcast. I know Apryl from the halcyon days of Lady Pod Squad way back when. Apryl used to co-host a podcast called The Thirst with her friend Steph, and I hear tell that The Thirst may be reanimated next year. Is this correct?
It is, yeah. We're really hoping to get back together in 2026 and just restart the podcast. It paused for a number of sort of personal reasons. And I see Steph all the time, and we always lament the fact that we just miss podcasting together. We're still having those conversations about all of the things we used to cover on the podcast all of the time. So I think we're going to try and get the ball rolling again next year. And now I've committed it to sound. I have to do it now.
Now you have to. I look forward to that very much. And listeners, I will leave a link to the Thirst podcast in the show notes as well. I also want to plug Apryl's Substack, I Was Afraid I'd Eat Your Brains. This is a pop culture stream of consciousness in newsletter form. I just love your Substack, Apryl.
Oh, thank you so much. I've been trying really hard to get back into the swing of writing more regularly about the things that I'm enjoying. And I'm pleased that I've actually done a full year of sending things out semi-regularly. So it's always nice when someone says they actually read it, because I spend a lot of time thinking about everything that goes into it. So it's good to know that people are actually opening it when it comes into their inbox.
Absolutely. I find your pop culture take super interesting, so I'm especially excited to hear what you have to say about Frankenstein. As I said, this is a 2025 gothic horror film. Guillermo del Toro adapts Mary Shelley's classic tale of Victor Frankenstein, a brilliant but egotistical scientist who brings a creature to life in a monstrous experiment that ultimately leads to the undoing of both the creator and his tragic creation. This movie stars Oscar Isaac, Jacob Elordi, Mia Goth, and Christoph Waltz. It was also written and directed by Guillermo del Toro, adapted, of course, from Mary Shelley's 1818 novel Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. Currently on Rotten Tomatoes, it has an 85% critic score and a 95% audience score. Apryl, you were telling me that you got the opportunity to see this film at the London Film Festival. Could you tell me a little bit about that, and also your expectations for this movie? Any thoughts you have on Guillermo del Toro and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein?
Yeah, absolutely. So I saw the film with my friend Steph. We didn't go to the London Film Festa proper in London, but as part of the programming for the festival, they do satellite screenings in locations outside of London. So our city was lucky to get a screening of Frankenstein, and we were both really pleased because we'd actually tried to get tickets for the gala screening in London and had missed out. So I was, just really pleased we were going to get the chance to see this on the big screen, because as much as I love the convenience of being able to watch things in my house, I always prefer to see things in a theatre as frequently as I possibly can. I was really intrigued to hear that Guillermo was getting the chance to finally make the film, as I know it's been like a huge passion project of his for a really, really long time, especially his desire to make a kind of Miltonian take on the film. I also think that the initial casting announcements had me really intrigued. I am a noted fan of Oscar Isaacs.
Me too.
So that had me immediately as soon as he was announced. I was also just generally intrigued that Andrew Garfield was initially going to be participating, but obviously he dropped out, because I think it was because of the strikes that had taken place at WGA and the acting strikes. So he dropped out really close to the start of the filming, and then Jacob Elordi stepped in, who's an actor who I like, but I'm not a huge fan of. So I was really intrigued. You know, I feel like his approach to acting is very different to Andrew Garfield's. So Guillermo having done all this prep with Andrew Garfield, I was interesting to see how that was then going to impact how Elodie would approach it. And I don't actually think I saw any trailer. I think I managed to avoid anything like that. I'd seen I'm a big fiend for, paparazzi behind the scenes photos or anything like that. So I'd seen some pictures of when they were filming it. I know they filmed parts of it in the UK. And I saw some stills of it, and I was sort of intrigued on that front as well. I really like Guillermo del Toro's work. I've definitely not seen all of his filmography, and there are films of his which I prefer more than others.
Yes.
But I just felt that his kind of otherworldly, gothic, weird approach would fit really well with Shelley's novel, and so I felt like him adapting it felt like a recipe for success, so I was definitely intrigued.
I agree with a lot of what you've said. I also was very intrigued by the Oscar Isaac casting. I just love him. I especially loved him in Ex Machina. I think he really, to be honest, first got on my radar through Star Wars, which I'm ashamed to say that that's what got him on my radar. But, I also do enjoy Guillermo del Toro's work. I wouldn't call myself a diehard fan necessarily. And as you said, some of his projects are more successful for you than others. Crimson Peak was one that I particularly enjoyed. And so knowing that he could translate that gothic vibe well, I too thought that this would be a good match with Mary Shelley's work. I just really respect Guillermo del Toro as a filmmaker. He has a very strong artistic vision, and that really comes across on the screen. And even though I feel like kind of in the Wes Anderson way, you see a lot of the same thing, the same style, and it can feel a little bit like treading water. But I'd far rather watch that, someone with a clear vision and a clear style, than just your normal Hollywood slop.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I feel like he is definitely one of those filmmakers that has a very specific approach and a specific visual style as well. And I kind of like it when directors are like that. I guess it's sort of an auteur approach, I guess, in a way. And that Wes Anderson comparison I think is really interesting as well, because he's another filmmaker that, like you say, people are often a bit critical of because he produces things that are very similar, but I always really enjoy that. So
Me
I think
too.
Guillermo is definitely similar on that front.
I would also call myself a fan of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I'm probably a bigger fan of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein than of Guillermo del Toro in general. Also, I wouldn't normally pick an adaptation of a story I'm so familiar with for this podcast, because I already know what may or may not be a Chekhov's gun. But I did watch the trailer, and even from watching the initial teaser trailer, I thought to myself, okay, Guillermo has taken certain liberties with the story. So that led me to believe there might actually be some unexpected tropes or Chekhov's guns in the movie.
Yeah, definitely. I remember I did an English literature degree when I was at university, and obviously we looked at the novel, Shelley's novel.
Yes.
And I'm sort of not as familiar with it as, beyond having studied it at university, I'm not as familiar with it as I know sort of many of my friends are. Steph's a huge fan of the book. But I was just really intrigued to see how Del Toro was going to approach it, and if he was likely to bring something different, because like you say, it is a story that I think, because of the way that Frankenstein has been, because of the long legacy in cinema of Frankenstein as a piece of property, I don't want to say IP because it feels really reductive for
Right.
something that's born from an amazing novel, but it is that kind of continued recurrence of the characters throughout cinematic history. So I was intrigued to see what he might do differently.
Yeah, is this Frankenstein going to stand out from all the other Frankensteins? Also, English majors represent. I also studied this book in college.
It was really funny trying to remind myself, because when I was watching the film, I was trying to kind of run in my head like, oh, is that in the book? I can't remember that part. So
Right.
I had to go back through and do like a kind of like Sparks Notes kind of reminder of like what is the plot of the book and what exactly happened. And it was a nice way to sort of revisit the time I'd spent studying it, because I do remember it being, just a very wonderful, wonderful Gothic tale.
Absolutely. So before we get into Frankenstein, here is a quick overview of how Chekhov's Whatever works. This is a podcast where myself and the guest watch and review a movie that's new to us. We also play a game where we try to guess what Chekhov's gun will be and how it will play out later in the movie. Chekhov's gun is a plot element that must have a setup and a payoff. That setup usually happens in Act 1, and the payoff typically comes later in Act 3. A Chekhov's gun is also typically a concrete item, action, or person rather than something symbolic or thematic. And finally, a Chekhov's gun should move the plot forward. We get 2 points if we correctly identify a Chekhov's gun. We also get an additional point if we correctly guess how that Chekhov's gun will pay off. And finally, we lose 1 point if we incorrectly identify a Chekhov's gun and its role. Whoever has the most points at the end of the movie wins. We start our movie in the year 1857 and open on an expedition ship stranded in the Arctic. The captain and his crew rescue a grievously injured man from the ice who is pursued by a monstrous and seemingly indestructible creature. This is, of course, Dr. Victor Frankenstein and the creature, as played by Oscar Isaac and Jacob Elordi, respectively. Right away, I do have a Chekhov's whatever guess, although even when I made it, I'm like, I don't know if this is going to be anything. Chekhov's prosthetic leg.
I had the same. I literally had the same. Yeah.
Okay, so what was your guess for what the payoff to this prosthetic leg might be?
I love that we immediately honed in on that. When I was watching the film, I was so smug as I sort of sat in my seat cackling to myself the minute it appeared, because I was like, yes, I've got like a solid thing to talk about. I felt that later down the line, we were going to get some obvious explanation as to why the prosthetic leg came to be, and that ultimately it wasn't going to be born from good circumstances.
That is a good guess. I feel like we see this a lot in TV shows lately where we get a sort of cold opening, if you will, in this case, a literally cold opening, where there's some sort of hook that is meant to get the audience asking, well, how did that happen? Or how did we get here? I think that having a monster attack a ship stranded in the Arctic is enough of a hook, but I guess Guillermo decided we needed a prosthetic leg as well. So I am also in the mindset of just the more like traditional, like Chekhov's gun is a weapon or something that turns the tide in some way. So my guess is a little bit more simplistic. I think there's going to be yet another battle scene similar to this one in the opening, and the leg will either be his downfall or his rescue. Like maybe he's falling off a cliff or something and the leg snaps off and he's able to climb to the top. Something to that effect.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel like it's going to be a good reason. You know, not that, no. You know, it's not good. It's going to be something, deeply terrible.
Yes. Aboard the ship, Frankenstein regales the captain with his tale. I will say immediately, even though I did find the fight between the monster and the sailors obviously a diversion from the novel, on the other hand, I'm like, oh, we rarely see the Arctic ship in adaptations of Frankenstein. It's usually omitted, so I was intrigued that this was included in the movie.
Yeah, I definitely thought it was interesting to have the kind of the framing device of the ship and the captain especially take this form in sort of contrast to the way that it does in the book. So you see the whole crew, you see to have that huge action set piece. I thought it was an interesting choice, but actually one I thought kind of, I don't know, was just an interesting way to set the tone for the way the film was going to pan out.
Yes. I especially like the scenes in the Arctic in the novel, strictly because I feel like the imagery is interesting. It's quite intriguing the way Shelley describes the creature on the ice. And then, as you said, the framing device. I think smartly, this movie isn't epistolary. I don't know how you could make an epistolary movie anyway.
Yeah.
But what they did with the ship, I think, works as a framing device. So we get into part 1, Victor's tale. Flashback to Victor as a young boy. Young Victor adores his mother and fears his father, a brilliant surgeon, but a cruel and distant father. The rift between father and son only grows after Victor's mother dies in childbirth, and his father goes on to dote upon his younger brother, William. Victor doesn't reconcile with his father before his passing. I did not realize upon first watching that Victor's mother was also Mia Goth.
I don't think it took me a while actually to realize, and I have another Chekhov's. So mine is You said at the start it tends to be something physical rather than a concept, but so I will caveat this by saying that I initially said Chekhov's Oedipal complex.
Yes.
However, I think we could also interpret that as Chekhov's dead mother.
Absolutely.
Because I obviously just feel that the way that this is going to pan out is this is someone that's going to, the legacy of his mother and his relationship with his mother and her death is just going to loom large over everything that he does. And I've also said that I think it will probably be his downfall where women are concerned as well.
The fact that his mother is played by Mia Goth and Elizabeth is also played by Mia Goth. Very strong Oedipal complex vibes.
I think that for me just, heightened it when I did click that it was Mia Goth. Because I don't think in the build up to the film, I don't think I had realised that that was the case, that she was doing a dual role on it or anything
I
like
didn't know that either. It wasn't until second viewing, in fact, that I was like, hey, wait a second. It's the eyebrows.
Yeah, it's the eyebrows.
Yeah,
I'd seen someone online this week say that they hadn't realised that it was her, and that they pointed out that the difference seems to be quite visually. Obviously, I think they have slightly darker actual hair, but it's the fact that she has eyebrows.
Yes.
As the mother, and when you put them side by side like that as a sort of like striking image, it's really funny to look at and kind of go like, oh yeah, it makes such a difference. You wouldn't realise.
It's pretty amazing the difference eyebrows make.
Yeah.
I enjoyed these opening scenes visually. It was actually very reminiscent to me of Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. More specifically in the colors that we see. There's a lot of black and white that's then emphasized by pops of red. And I just saw so many parallels between the young Ichabod Crane and his mother and the young Victor Frankenstein here and his mother. And since I did enjoy Sleepy Hollow so much as a younger woman, you know, I enjoyed the nostalgic feelings of this movie.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice insight into obviously like Victor's home life, where he comes from, his relationships with his parents. And I do think that Del Toro does such interesting things within those scenes with colour, particularly with the fact that his mother's always wearing red, and it's directly in contrast to the sort of, you know, sort of grand surroundings that they live in. And there was a really striking moment when they're maybe playing chess at a table together when she starts to fall ill, and he's wearing a, you know, white shirt and trousers, and she gets up and grabs him, and then he calls for his parents, and then when she's rushed away, you just have the striking imagery of the handprints on his chest. And it just felt like it's those little things, those attentions to detail that I think that Del Toro is so good at.
Absolutely. Very interesting visuals. And also from that moment forward, after his mother dies, he incorporates a red cravat or necktie, something like that, into his wardrobe. So it is kind of it is sort of the visual language of him carrying his mother with him.
Yeah.
Grieving for his mother, Victor vows to devote himself and his research to conquering death. I kind of don't like that Guillermo felt the need to over-explain why Victor needs to conquer death. I feel like it would have been adequate to be like, his mom died when she was young.
Yeah,
I don't know. I was looking for ways to cut down on the runtime of this movie.
Yeah, it did feel a little bit laboured, I think, just to really like have to hammer home exactly why this sort of profound experience he'd had in childhood would then obviously stay with him for the rest of the life. But it feels very melodramatic in that way, so I think that probably leads into it.
True. We then flash forward to Victor as an adult in 1855 at the Royal College of Medicine. He is giving a gruesome demonstration of his ability to reanimate a corpse. This catches the attention of one Heinrich Harlander, played by Christoph Waltz. Harlander is an entirely new creation of Del Toro's. This is not a character in the book. He's not even really the Igor character, I would say. He's just the benefactor.
Yeah, I that was one of the things that when I had to go back and do my like studious revision of the original text, that I just sort of second guessed myself. It took me a while to sort of go when I was watching the film, like I just don't remember this part. That was one of the things that had prompted me to then go and do some follow-up, because I, you know, was just convinced that wasn't a character in the novel, and as you say, it isn't. It's an interesting character to sort of feel like you have to insert into the film, I think. I understand in terms of moving the plot along, particularly with his relationship with then Elizabeth and with William. But it was just an interesting choice to make, I think.
I will never complain about seeing Christoph Waltz on
Well,
screen.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately how I felt.
Yes, I do feel like ultimately the character is maybe a bit unnecessary. I asked myself, why did Del Toro feel the need to include this character? And again, I think it was this maybe sort of tendency to over-explain, like, well, I have to say how Victor got access to all these bodies. I have to explain how Victor got his funding. And I just don't feel that that is totally necessary to telling the story.
No, he does become a slight conduit to kind of over-emphasizing the connection to the Crimean War and the fact that Hollander is obviously supposed to have made his money, will be making his money through supporting the war. He said ammunitions, I think, isn't it? So, like you say, yeah, it is a sort of just a very tenuous way of having to keep going, like, oh, well, he's getting the bodies this way, or this is where the money's coming from, essentially. Even though I think you probably could have gotten away without having to have that inserted.
Yes, I think so. When Harlander is introduced, I also had another guess, Chekhov's cane. We see him sort of caressing this cane that has a carving of a nude woman on it. I'm like, is it a sword cane? There's always a sword cane, right?
Yeah, I felt that there was a lot of like lingering shots on
Yes.
the cane. I thought what was interesting for me is I did realize on second watch that really early on in the scenes in Victor's childhood, you see him playing absent-mindedly with like a I can't think how to describe it. It's not a toy, but it's like a model of a pregnant
It's kind
woman
of like an anatomical model.
Yes,
sort
yeah,
of.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he's putting it back together, and it's obviously, it looks visually like it's carved out of ivory, which would have been sort of like period appropriate. And I made a sort of on the second watch a parallel between that and the cane, because I think the cane also is like a ivory carved. I can't think what the shape of it was, but I thought it was just interesting to have these pops of, you know, they've just both got these things that they just were touching and obviously have like a real tangible connection to.
Yes. And the anatomical model, speaking of the Oedipal complex, it was like a pregnant woman, like his mother, and he's just absentmindedly fondling it.
Obviously very fascinated by what's going on, yeah.
Yes. My guess more specifically for how I think the cane will have a payoff later, I am going to guess that during the experiment to reanimate the corpse, something will go awry in the machinery and Victor will have to improvise using Harlander's cane as a sort of bridge or conduit for the electricity.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think where Harlander was concerned, I had another Chekhov, which was Chekhov's mysterious secret. Because during a conversation that the two of them have, Harlander tells Victor that all he'll ask from him is that there'll be a favour that he'll need further down the line, but we're not told what the favour is. But again, I think that this favour as a concept, this thing that he's going to ask for, is just going to be like a huge imposition for Victor, or something that he's just like not going to want to do or not be involved with.
Good guess. Yeah, that is the very next scene. Harlander offers Frankenstein unlimited funding for his research, but in return, he will ask an unknown favor of Victor someday. Victor is hesitant to agree to these terms, but he is intrigued, especially when Harlander gives him the idea to target the lymphatic system to reanimate a corpse. He also calls Victor Prometheus in this scene, obviously a nod to the original novel. At Harlander's home, Victor is reunited with his younger brother, William, and he is introduced to William's fiancée, Elizabeth, played by Mia Goth. Elizabeth also happens to be Harlander's niece. What do we think about this meet cute?
Well, in terms of the meet cute, I had her down as being Chekhov's niece. Because I just felt it was, and obviously because I had made the connection to thinking to it being Mia Goth, I was like, well, this immediately can't be, this is not going to pan out in any positive way whatsoever. I couldn't really get a sense of whether, you know, she was going to be a character that was going to be, I just couldn't get a sense of how she would disrupt Victor's journey, but I knew that she was going to be a bit of a fork in the road, or she was going to be a barrier or a hurdle that he would have to get over at some point.
Yes. Again, those darn pesky women.
It's always, yeah, this is the thing. This is what I kept coming back to. In his life, it just seems to be women, you know?
It's true. I did like the introduction of Elizabeth because of her costuming. The costumes are just so stunning in this movie. And she's wearing this gorgeous peacock dress, and she has these peacock colored feathers. Maybe I used the wrong word there. They aren't peacock feathers, but they are that sort of tealish color that are framing her face. She just looks very beautiful, very delicate. And she picks up a skull from a memento mori that Harlander was painting. So I'm like, this is foreshadowing with the knowledge of what happens to the Elizabeth parallel in the novel. It's like, that can't be good, having a skull be introduced alongside her.
I did absolutely love that scene at Harlander's house where he's obviously someone that's interested in photography and the sort of emerging art of photography, and you see him, he's taking pictures of a model and he's chastising her because she's eating this peach, because it's this, obviously like lovely, delicious thing. I think she's nude, isn't she? And she's having this picture taken. And I thought it was very interesting to then have the contrast with Elizabeth, who is just sort of in this, like you say, this really wonderfully striking outfit, the color contrasting so much to the kind of reds that we've had previously. I thought that was really interesting. And like you say, I sort of thought that there was really something really interesting in the way that she is sort of interested in this skull and picks it up. It just felt like a really funny contrast to this previous model that's just like, oh, this peach, this, this thing that's very very tactile and very just, I don't know, cherubic, and she's just got this thing that is just like the embodiment of death.
You're right. That is really interesting contrast. But yeah, very, very interesting visual language in this film throughout. Absolutely. I felt like I could relate to the model eating the peach because watching this movie, looking at the gorgeous sets, I'm like, I can't decide if I want to live in this scene or like eat it. So much of the visuals were just so sumptuous that I'm like, if I could eat a movie, I would maybe choose parts of it.
It's like very visually rich in the way that like looking at a delicious banquet meal, I think, would be, and those scenes especially are just like, it's you see there's very physical reminders of the fact that obviously Hollander is someone that has money and is just showing that he has money in a very specific way.
Absolutely. So Victor and Elizabeth quarrel upon first meeting. She warns of what can happen when lofty ideas are pursued by fools. The implication being, of course, that Frankenstein is a fool. Harlander gives Victor an abandoned tower, which is an old water filtration plant, in which to conduct his experiments. And Victor finally agrees and accepts the deal. My next guess, you might have this one as well, Chekhov's giant hole in the floor.
I did have it. Yeah, I did.
When you see a giant hole in the floor, I mean, someone's getting thrown to their death, surely.
For me, I just was looking at it and going, like, that feels like something that is like a health and safety nightmare. It doesn't
OSHA would not be happy.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, I was going, like, if I had to risk assess this in a work capacity, I think I would like lose my mind. It just feels like no good's going to come of it. Someone is quite clearly going down that open chasm that's just in the middle of the floor. Like, there's not even like they create a boundary around it with any gates or anything. Like, it's just no
railings, no safety cones.
Just gotta
and
walk
it's practically
around
a funnel too. You can just sort of slip down into it.
This is what I thought was so funny as I kept looking at it, going like, but it's literally like you could just, if you were standing at the wrong angle, you're just there's an incline there. It feels like it can't not be going to be a plot point.
Yes. Victor outfits the tower laboratory with a pure silver lightning rod system and tinkers unsuccessfully with reanimating a corpse. Meanwhile, Victor only grows more smitten with Elizabeth. They have some flirtations. There's a moment where he pretends to be a priest in a confession booth.
Loved that scene so much.
I thought it was great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so much about Oscar Isaac's performance in this film that at times feels like very campy. In the best possible way. And that one moment in particular when he's just doing a voice that he sort of feels a priest would speak in, it was just I just absolutely loved it.
I did too. Did you say hammy?
Yeah, hammy and campy. It's just
campy, yes.
Yeah, he's properly hamming it up, isn't he?
I do feel like that is a good descriptor. He really does a bunch of scenery chewing, and in someone else's hands, I might not have enjoyed it as much, but I find Oscar Isaac quite charismatic and charming. And particularly in this scene, he's rather rakish. And I did find that to be cute, their flirtation and the dancing that came afterwards.
I think it's just interesting because he's so different, both visually and temperament wise, to his brother. So I do think it's sort of, there's a kind of confidence that he just seems to imbue, that I think that he just assumes that Elizabeth is going to meet him and just be interested and kind of realize like, oh, this is the alternative that I could have. And I think that comes across just in his mannerisms and how he, in those initial first meetings that they have and when they are spending more time together, you can see he's sort of getting, you know, they're just feeding off one another in a very, very fascinating way.
I do really like their interactions. I did feel that they had chemistry. Speaking specifically to the Elizabeth character, though, I really appreciate Mia Goth. I like what she did with the material she was given here. However, I do have some quibbles with the material itself. I would describe this Elizabeth as a manic gothic dream girl.
She is, isn't she? She does have like manic pixie dream girl energy, but like the goth version.
She's not like the other girls. She reads books. She likes bugs.
It's funny to think about that scene we were just talking about where she does just pick up the skull, because when I rewatched it, I said to my partner, I was like, oh, she's not like other girls. She likes looking at like morbid things, you know. The other girl's got this like nice peach and she's just gone like, oh, I'm just gonna look at that skull, and it just comes across in like everything that she seems to be interested in.
Gosh, I can't remember who said it, but I read a review that described her costumes in these scenes in particular as also being sort of insect-like. And I don't think I would have come to that conclusion myself, but I'm like, oh, that's a good observation. I think that that's very true.
I have a feeling I listened or read the same thing, because it made me think about some of the costumes that she is wearing in those scenes. And there's one, I think, that is a particular, like a dark greenish color, which then actually afterwards I was going like, oh yeah, that is very bug-like, isn't it? Like very beetle-ish.
And when they're catching butterflies in the meadow, she's catching these yellow butterflies, and her costume itself is also very gauzy and yellow, sort of mimicking the butterflies. And, you know, she's kind of that like caged bird, caged butterfly character herself. So obviously very intentional parallels with the costuming. At first, the feeling seems mutual between Victor and the scientifically inquisitive Elizabeth, but she ultimately rebuffs his advances when she comes to believe that he is perverting God's ways. This part I did feel was interesting about Elizabeth. She's sort of this pious avatar for divinity, for God. Mm-hmm. We learn that she has just come from a convent. She, in most scenes, if not in every scene, has a red beaded crucifix around her neck. So she's very much the foil to Victor playing God. She's there to be the reminder of like, you shouldn't meddle in God's ways.
What I think is really interesting about her sort of positioning in that role is that she's very interested in insects and the science behind everything like that, and it's just this sort of really fascinating kind of balance between the science aspect
yes,
and then actually, you know, just God and God creating everything. And it's weird that she exists as a bit of a reminder for Victor that actually you can't be playing around with these things, but she's almost herself kind of like you know, unpicking, wanting to know more about how things work, which I think is really interesting.
That is interesting. Maybe she believes in, what is it, the watchmaker theory?
Yeah.
When an impatient Harlander demands results and threatens to withdraw funds, Victor is forced to harvest mangled corpses from the battlefields, which he reassembles into a patchwork creation ready for reanimation. But how? I found this to be an interesting sort of montage with him assembling the creature's body. There's a very whimsical score, I would say, over this scene.
It's really
I'm
odd,
not sure
isn't
if it was
it?
Effective for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really odd. I think on second I don't think I picked up on it on the first time I saw the film, but when I did rewatch it, it did feel really tonally all over the place, because you've got this like very morbid scenes of, you know, like you say, Victor wandering across a battlefield and having to instruct someone that's assisting him about you know, which of the corpses that he deems suitable enough to then be, you know, hacked apart for his experiments. All the while thinking about where all of these sort of dead young men have come from, this like looming spectre of death all the time, but of course war. But it just seems so at odds with the kind of music that was playing behind it. That felt really tonally odd.
Like most things in this movie, we have to assume it's intentional, right? Like it was meant to be odd. But then I ask why. We, like you said, we have these gruesome scenes, and then, but what are we meant to interpret the whimsy to be about? You know, that Victor is just having so much fun tinkering with playing God. But I didn't get the impression that he was really. So yeah, I don't know if the score was effective for me in this scene.
You know, he seems very tortured by it. So to have this kind of music that's just very upbeat and almost like fairy tale like in a way, you know, like obviously you can view the whole thing as a bit of a fairy tale in and of itself. But that was the point at which I was like, oh, it is kind of this weird sort of, it's funny you mentioned Tim Burton at the start, because it felt very kind of, I don't know, Burton-esque weirdly at that point as well.
I will say it was in this point in the movie where I thought, is this Danny Elfman? I need to look up who the composer is.
It would have made sense. Yeah.
Yes, it wasn't, but I would have believed it. Inspiration strikes Victor when he recalls something Elizabeth said about God's symmetry, and he has an idea for how to reanimate the corpse. I also want to point out that he springs from the bathtub naked when inspiration strikes.
Like, so that was when we saw it in the cinema, Steph and I was just sort of like vaguely beside ourselves, because it just felt so like, oh, this feels like it's very much like there for our benefit. Like he could have been doing like literally anything else. Obviously it's meant to be indicating that he's obviously trying to relax and he just simply can't, you know, when he actually lets his mind rest, he suddenly has this revelation.
It's like a shower thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was grateful for it, but it was just very funny.
Yeah, speaking of peaches, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
As a thunderstorm approaches, Victor prepares the body for reanimation, to which I say, Jesus symbolism much?
So striking, isn't it?
Yes.
So striking.
Harlander reveals to Victor in the scene that he is dying of syphilis and demands that Victor transfer his mind into the new body. Victor refuses, and as Harlander attempts to sabotage the experiment, he falls to his death. So yeah, we've got a couple of payoffs here in that scene. Harlander does in fact reveal his mysterious secret, as you alluded to.
Yeah, I was quite pleased when that happened. That I think it was actually only on the second watch that I really clocked that he does make the very laboured point about, oh, there is this secret, there is something that I'm going to ask you. So yes. I was very smug that I picked up on it, and that there was actually payoff, and it wasn't just me like really reading into the situation. It was interesting, you know. I think it's very interesting that they reveal that he has syphilis and that he wants to be essentially, you know, transported into the mind of the creation that Victor is making. I think I find it, because obviously the Harlander character isn't real in the book. He's a complete construct based on Del Toro's you know, decision as the filmmaker. Making him sick and making that what he wants essentially out of Victor, that he's basically just been financing. It's a huge long game to be playing and a lot of money to be putting in.
True.
So just being like, I really want to achieve immortality. I'd really like to keep going. Yeah, just fascinating choice.
A very big investment, also considering that there's been no evidence to this point that Victor is capable of transferring consciousness from one body to another.
Yeah, this is the thing. It's obviously like we know that he's sort of capable of like creating physical movement and constructing life in a sense from, you know, body parts. But yeah, there's been no confirmed like, oh yeah, no, I can definitely make you, it's just going to be a 1 in 1 out situation. There's none of that. There's no hard evidence.
Not at all. I also felt gratified by this scene because up until this point I was like, why does Harlander's hair look so bad?
It's very wiggy.
And the answer was it was a wig. And I was like, okay, well, I'm glad to know that there's an in-universe reason for why his hair looked so horrible.
Yeah, that's very good clocking by you to kind of go like, yeah, actually, this is something's not right up here.
I just felt bad. I was like, they did Christoph Waltz dirty with that hair, but then there was a reason for it.
Yeah.
Victor proceeds with the experiment and successfully channels lightning into the creature, but it seems to fail. The body is without life. Or so it seems at first. Victor wakes from a vision to the creature standing over his bed. He places his ear on its chest and hears a heartbeat. It's alive. I never know in a Frankenstein adaptation if they're going to do the it's alive thing or not.
Part of me was disappointed, even though I think if it had happened, it would have been like a massive eye roll.
I do feel like Isaac's performance up to this point, like you said, is campy enough that he might have been able to pull off an it's alive. But ultimately, yeah, I do think it's good that they did not include that. Victor encourages the creature to face the sunlight and embrace life. And I mention this only because it comes back later in the movie. Victor teaches the creature to say his name, but he grows frustrated and resentful when that one word appears to be the limit of its intelligence. He chains the creature down in the bowels of the tower, wary of its incredible strength and its regenerative healing abilities. Overall, I liked the design of the creature. It felt very sleek, and they do hang a lantern on this. They have Victor say, "Oh, I don't have this crude stitching technique. I've patented my special stitching technique." So it's a very patchwork, sort of jigsaw looking image to the creature. But I don't know. I couldn't get on board with the diaper or loincloth.
I thought what was really interesting in those scenes, obviously, like the when the creature first appears, he obviously begins to mimic Victor's behavior, and it feels very like childlike when babies particularly will just, follow what you're doing. So that to me maybe felt like that was the only purpose, that like on a very, I don't know, crude visual marker, that kind of like loincloth thing was like, oh, it's like that's very diaper like, it's very baby like. That's probably an absolute reach for me, and I don't think it's intentional. I find the character design for the creature really intriguing. There's something really funny about the fact that my first thought upon seeing it when we were in the theatre, and I vividly remember leaning over to Steph because she was in complete agreement with me, is that it weirdly does look very reminiscent of the Prometheus characters in the Prometheus Alien.
The engineers.
Yeah, the engineers. And I did not in any way think like I'm going to be the first person that is going to have made this connection, but it was just so funny to go like, oh, that's really weird, isn't it? Like, I don't think it's intentional on Del Toro's part at all, but they do bear striking resemblance. And then I was very pleased a couple of days after we'd seen it, that I had seen some things online where someone had gone like, did anyone else think that they just looked exactly
Yes.
like the engineers? And I was like, oh yeah, good. I'm glad that we are all in agreement that like from a particularly from a colour perspective, it's the colour and the
very
shape.
Blue.
Yeah, the weird sort of bluey grey tone. So yeah, it just felt very funny that like, oh, that's from Prometheus.
Yes. I am on entirely the same page. I had the same thought. I do feel like it's too much of a coincidence to not be a coincidence.
Yeah.
But also maybe not. I don't know.
I'm just surprised that it got like this far down
Yes.
the sort of production route. There's someone at some point that was involved in the film. There has to be someone that has seen that film.
It's like, wait a second.
Hang on. Yeah, it's looking really familiar.
Also, a very striking image for me in the book was that the creature is described as being actually quite yellow looking, almost jaundiced looking. It's just yellow and dead. And that always stuck with me. So I am always a little disappointed when I feel like an adaptation doesn't quite follow through on how grotesque the creature can look.
Well, it's interesting to make it like, because I guess he's grotesque, but he's not grotesque in the way that we know Frankenstein to be. And for me, it just felt very much, we know that we know the parts that he's constructed from are from, because we see it, frozen corpses from a battlefield. And he does have this bluey tint to him that is obviously, if you go back and you look at those corpses, you've been on the battlefield, you're cold. They have been kept on ice. But it's not, I don't think, I was also a bit disappointed that it just sort of continued as this slightly, I couldn't unsee it as being like anything other than like alien blue-grey.
Yes. And if he had stayed bald, he would have looked even more like the engineers in Prometheus. But I did prefer the bald look. And I'll admit this is a huge nitpick, but when the creature starts to grow hair, the hair is very uniform. And I was like, well, surely the hair would be patchwork like the skin underneath. It's not like his scalp is made of the same hair pieces, you know?
For someone that is constructed from like multiple body parts from a variety of different people, the fact that he had like a full head of hair
Yes.
was like obviously at some point we do see that Victor has to cut for him, to shave for him. I was like, wow, like imagine if they could just like patent that technology. That would be like incredible for so many people.
He has a very luxurious mane of hair. Once
Yeah,
it
yeah. It ends up being at times. It feels like very like Disney Prince-esque in a weird way.
Prince Adam in Beauty and the Beast specifically,
yeah.
I thought.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, they're kind of like tied back at the nape of his neck. Yeah.
William and Elizabeth come to check up on Victor and Harlander. William gives Victor a letter from the Royal Medical Society, who may be willing to take him back. Meanwhile, Elizabeth discovers the creature in the basement and approaches it. Unafraid, she bonds with the creature and grows increasingly fond of it. She teaches it to say her name, and he gifts her a leaf. So, when they first start staring lovingly at each other, I was like, oh no, Guillermo, is this going to go full Shape of Water?
I'm sure she won't mind me sharing this, but Steph and I had a conversation a couple of days after having seen this film about how where the creature would sit in the Del Toro like list of like creature romantic interests, and you know like a hotness scale. Like when one of the things we used to do on the podcast, I remember we would do like a just sort of ranking things, you know, characters in. We did an entire Avengers one, for example. We ranked all of the Avengers according to hotness, and it was just making us think like, oh, where do you think the creature sits in terms of like who is the hottest? It's like, you know, Del Toro weird creature that like you probably shouldn't find attractive on any level, but there is a slight weird animalistic draw that you have to him. And obviously Shape of Water is the most obvious comparison with that, but the minute that they lock eyes in that basement, there is something that's just we were very much like, oh no, like, oh, she's done it again. Like
my initial thought was definitely oh no, and also not every movie needs to be a monster fucker movie, Del Toro. It just doesn't.
Yeah
But yeah, I think now that you posed the question, he probably ranks pretty high, certainly higher than the eyeball guy in Pan's Labyrinth.
Absolutely, yeah. I can't actually remember what our ranking was, but I think he made the top 5. So, you know, congrats to him.
You know, he's tall. Women do tend to like a tall man. That
was what we led with. Was like, well, he is tall.
He's quite tall.
Yeah, and he seems very kind and inquisitive. So
yes. So yeah, even though I had conflicting feelings about this scene, it was an intriguing scene. I did also like that the monster was putting these dead leaves on the water and watching the stream of water take the leaf away. And I felt that this was a reference to the original Frankenstein movie from the 30s, was it? Where with the girl throwing flowers into the river. Mm-hmm. That was a nod to Frankensteins that had come before, so I appreciated it.
Yeah, it's nice. I think it's interesting to have the kind of the kindness that Elizabeth shows him. Obviously, it's just a nice thing for him to experience when Victor seems to turn on him so immediately after an initial sort of, oh, you're amazing, I've done it, I'm amazing, isn't it incredible, to sort of treating him in quite a monstrous way that just completely echoes the way that, you know, his own father, that Victor's own father would treat him. He then treats the creature. So I think that the kindness that Elizabeth shows to the creature, it's why that felt kind of so moving and so purposeful, that actually, you know, she sort of sees him for something different than Victor does.
Yes. Something new that Del Toro brings to this particular adaptation is this theme of generational trauma, which I would say is not present in the original novel. So as you said, this certainly is yet another scene that emphasizes and underscores that Victor has become his own father in many ways. He is the cruel, absentee, abusive father in the same way that his own father was.
Yeah, you see the way that he treats the creature is indicative of that scene right at the start where his father's asking him to recall different medical facts during his learning, and Victor doesn't get one, and his father's immediate response is to not hit him in the hands because they're his tools, but to hit him on the face. And yeah, it's just sort of to see that carried down so vividly that Victor inevitably just becomes that. It's that generational thing that you say, isn't it?
Fortunately, Oscar Isaac's face was not affected.
Well, I was expecting there to be a scar. That was the one thing I thought that was good. We're going to see him in the next scene and he would have had a massive scar, but alas.
Yes, Elizabeth is appalled by Victor's treatment of the creature. She believes the creature to be pure and free of sin. Victor obviously disagrees, and he only grows more jealous. He lies to William about Harlander's death, saying that the creature killed him. And in a fit of pique, Victor sends William and Elizabeth away and sets fire to his own laboratory with the creature inside. To which I say, how many gas cans does one man own?
Yeah, I was fascinated by like where all of that was coming from when you see him like going through the house and he's just picking up more and more. And yeah, I just don't remember there being so much petrol at any point previously, but he's obviously just got a huge stash of it.
Yes, I feel like this could have been a Chekhov's gun early in the movie. We could have seen a bunch of gas canisters everywhere. Victor has a change of heart when he hears the creature cry out his name, but before he can save the creature, he is injured in a massive explosion, which severs his leg and collapses the tower. So that's how we got to the prosthetic leg.
It's very vivid and very gory, the way that
it's quite gory.
Yeah,
yes.
He's blown and then his leg literally snaps at a very concerning angle.
Very concerning angle, gosh. We then return to the ship as the creature comes aboard and tells his side of the story. Part 2, the creature's tale. We find out that the creature escaped the fire and found himself alone in the wilderness. Fleeing hunters, he takes shelter in a grist mill on a peasant's farm. So I spoke previously about how I liked the scenery, the sets. I found it all very sumptuous. Some visuals that I found not as effective are the CGI effects. Here in these scenes, we've got some CGI deer. We have CGI mice. We have CGI wolves. And I'm like, Guillermo, did you blow the 120 million on the ship? Was there nothing left over for the CGI? It's
really interesting when you have a filmmaker like Del Toro who is so fond and outspoken about his, love of using practical effects.
Yes.
And how, you see this in all of his films, that everything is like we've been saying, so sumptuous and so tactile, and you do feel like you could reach out and touch it, and most of the time you can, because it is physically there. It's been crafted by all of the amazing people that he works with. So it is really interesting in this back half of the film to see this sudden shift towards a kind of a reliance on CGI. And it's not even CGI where you kind of go like, oh, I didn't realize that was CGI. Like, well done, you. Like, that's convincing. You had me there. It's like it felt very, very obvious. And I think what I found very interesting about seeing it on the big screen initially was that it just felt even more obvious on a grand scale. I think when I watched it at home, obviously because just my television screen is far, far smaller, I think it felt less obvious to me. But when I saw it on the big screen, it did just feel like the wolves especially, the mice perhaps less, but they are obviously quite very much not there. But the wolves especially were on the cusp of being like very Twilight-esque, which I thought was a shame really, because you'd sort of had this previous, hour and a half of actually a lot of what felt very much like, like you say, you could step into it, you could, be a part of it. But those things just felt very much like not there.
It really is a shame. I think that's a good way of putting it, because I watched a brief interview with Guillermo del Toro where he was specifically talking about the construction of the ship and how it's to scale. It's this huge set. They put it on a gimbal so that the creature could physically push it. And in this interview, he said, I want these places to feel lived in. I want them to feel real. And he also spoke briefly about stunts and how pretty much all the stunts were real people jumping off the ship, etc. And he emphasized, I just want this to look real. I don't want the audience to be taken out of the movie by something not real looking. So I felt disappointed on his behalf to see so much of the latter half of the movie looking so unreal.
Yeah.
In a quite cheesy way.
It does feel cheesy, doesn't it? Because I think that one of the things I didn't say about the lab or the tower that Victor had previously is it reminded me at times of the Crimson Peak house, just in how very gothic and how sort of like a very specific visual style. But you could tell that they were walking around in all of it. And it's interesting as well when Del Toro is so outspoken about, understandably so, and I don't disagree with him on this front, his, disdain for generative AI and use of AI in things. And I'm not conflating the two things at all on any level, that CGI and AI are the same, because they're completely not. But it is just, I think when you have the expectation of a filmmaker like Del Toro that is such a craftsman and he creates these spaces and he knows how to utilize the practical, it is just disappointing, and it's a shame that he wants people to feel like they can go into the thing, and yet you have a huge chunk of it that just very much isn't like that.
And also, you can still have CGI that doesn't look realistic, but can look stylistic in an interesting way. And even if we look at Guillermo del Toro's former work, let's say Pacific Rim, for example, obviously there's a lot of CGI in that film, but it's interesting to look at because it is designed in a stylistic way. But I did not get that feeling from this movie at all.
No, it does feel like maybe the Netflix money ran out and that they were just very much
kind of feel that way.
Yeah, it does. And I think for me it felt even more like that when I did watch it at home and I was able to see what the time split is between Victor's part of the film and then the creature's part of the film, and there is an unbalance there. So it is sort of quite funny to not be able to, I can't see it as anything like, oh, this is towards the end, and I know that's not how filmmaking works, right? It's not like they don't film it in a linear way, but it is interesting to just sort of go like, oh, it's just really odd that you've sort of like built the momentum of the visuals and then you've got this side of stuff that is just directly in contrast to that.
Absolutely. In the mill, the creature can secretly observe the peasant family in their adjoining home. He watches and learns as a kindly blind man teaches his granddaughter to read. The creature secretly helps the man and his family, who believe their mysterious benefactor to be the spirit of the forest. When the rest of the family leaves for the winter, the creature reveals himself to the blind man, who befriends him without question or hesitation. He teaches the creature to read and speak fluently. So this part of the tale hews very closely to the novel. Absolutely. It's very, very similar to the novel.
I really liked these scenes with the old man. There's a line that the creature says that it just felt very striking, was that he says that for a brief moment the world and I were at peace. And it is interesting to sort of see that he's been born from death and destruction, and then he's gone through this deeply traumatic thing of having to escape essentially being murdered, really. So for him to sort of find a space that he can be and actually observe and particularly learn who he is and find his voice, it's sort of quite nice to have that contrast, and you feel it as well, I think.
These were some of the most effective scenes in the movie for me as well. They're very contemplative. They're slower paced. We get to see that the creature is quite emotive and vulnerable. I do appreciate that the movie gave these scenes space to breathe, to introduce us to the creature more properly.
Yeah, you learn that he's ultimately quite a sympathetic character. There is a lot of emotion there, and I think that's a really interesting callback to the way that Elizabeth shows him kindness and compassion, and it feels like he's internalized that, and he's actually, we're essentially learning that the monster is not a monster after all,
That old chestnut. There's also allusions to Paradise Lost, which are in the novel, and the Bible. I thought it was interesting that the creature mentions by name Adam, because some people in analyzing Frankenstein, call the creature Adam because the creature is never given a name, and also references to Ozymandias. A lot of literary references going on here that felt very relevant.
Yeah, I really enjoyed when I think he's reading from Ozymandias, isn't he? I thought that was really, that was a very, very nice touch. And I think does the old man give him the copy of Paradise Lost when he's like working his way through the books? Yeah, I thought that was quite a nice, if not obvious thing to do. It felt like a really, it was like a nice reference to, other things that were other pieces of work from the particular time.
Unfortunately, one day the old man is attacked and killed by CGI wolves. The rest of the family stumbles upon the scene at the most inopportune moment and believe the creature to be a murderer. They drive him away and mortally wound him in doing so, yet he is able to recover. He seems unable to die. The creature journeys back to Victor's lab and finds notes which reveal the truth of his unnatural creation. He also finds Victor's name and address on a discarded letter from the medical society.
I will say I did enjoy the convenience of there seems to have been this massive, the whole building's fallen down. There's been a huge fire, and yet he just happens to go and find all of these like Victor must have been using like incredibly resilient paper stock,
Yes.
like just to find it all. Felt very very convenient.
Very convenient. I'd also like to point out, I feel like this is perhaps a Chekhov's gun that I did not personally identify, because William gives him the letter. There's a zoom in on it. We get another zoom in on the letter when Victor is throwing stuff into the pile to be burnt. And then it does have the payoff of that it gives the creature the information he needs to track down his maker. So I would call that a Chekhov's gun, but I didn't clock it when I was watching it.
I didn't clock it either, but I think now in retrospect it absolutely is, because the fact that, like I say, it manages to survive, is obviously, it was there for a reason.
Yes. In despair, the creature realizes he cannot die, but he also cannot live for an eternity alone. The creature confronts Victor on the night of William and Elizabeth's wedding, demanding that Victor create a companion for him, one just like him. Victor refuses, saying he never should have created the creature in the first place, much less help to propagate a race of monsters.
What's interesting, though, is like Victor is so repulsed at the prospect of like one having to create another thing like the creature again, and also seems like horrified that the creature not only has obviously like learnt to speak, but has also learnt to think, and also now seemingly has enough emotion within him that he's identified that actually what he wants in order to continue through whatever life it is that he's going to have is that he wants to have a companion with it. I think it's an interesting allusion to the fact that he's obviously, the creature has developed like, and he has it within him, like very human qualities, like he talks at length about how he's really lonely, like he's in the world on his own, like he has no one else that understands his unique perspective. And the thing that I think obviously, like I think all of us can identify with is that you want someone to be able to see things from your perspective. You want a companion. But Victor is just like completely unable to even fathom any of that. There's a line that the creature says, "I'm obscene to you, but to myself I simply am."
Yes.
Which I think I thought was a really striking, way of sort of thinking about like what it must be like to be him. But because there is like physically, other than Elizabeth, I think that maybe was able to sort of see things from his perspective ever so slightly, there is nobody else that can see that. So obviously I think to him it's a logical conclusion that like, the solution here is that I just need you just make another one, do it again.
Yeah, have another being who like me is unable to die and can understand me fully and completely. The difference here between the novel and the adaptation, I believe, is subtle, but actually quite important, because Victor in the movie, as we talked about, he was kind of repulsed or turned off by the fact that the creature seemed to be unintelligent in his initial estimation. And perhaps that was one reason why he felt it to be a failure and abnormal. But now he's presented with the creature again, and it's very clear that this is, in fact, an intelligent, conscious being. So I feel like the movie doesn't give enough reason for Victor to be so repulsed by the creature. Whereas in the book, at this point in the book, the creature has killed William in cold blood. I can't remember if it's killed Elizabeth yet in cold blood, but if not, that happens soon. Mm-hmm. And he's also killed a friend of Victor's, Henry, I believe his name was, in cold blood. So in the book, it's very obvious why Victor would be hesitant to create a race of creatures exactly like this particular creature. But in this movie, the creature is almost faultless. He's like this small being, this innocent thing. So it doesn't track.
No, it doesn't, does it? And I think that's a really interesting decision that Del Toro has made to make the creature far more sympathetic and far less, you know, we do see flashes of his ability to be violent. He has the capacity, yes. He has the strength to actually react in a particularly over emotive, violent way, definitely. So he's not completely at fault in that regard, but he definitely is far more sympathetic and, you know, this sort of sad fallen figure. It's the Miltonian mm-hmm. side of things, you know, like there is just an inherent sadness within him that seems very at odds to the way that we know that it is in the book, where actually it is in the cold blood side of yes. things. Yeah, so it feels like a very purposeful choice on Del Toro's part, and one that I keep thinking about at length, actually.
Yeah, I do feel like this is kind of the crux of the adaptation in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And many of the themes of the book are quite flattened. The movie loses a lot of nuance. It makes the creature almost wholly sympathetic mm-hmm. and Victor almost wholly unsympathetic.
Yeah.
Whereas in the novel, it's neither Victor nor the creature are entirely faultless, and Victor in particular is a lot more sympathetic in the book, I think, for good reason, mm-hmm. because you need to have, you know, a little bit of intellectual nuance there, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think you are right. In the film, they seem to exist in this far more binary positioning of mm-hmm. without being reductive, but Victor is the bad guy and the creature is the good guy. He's far more mm-hmm. tragic, whereas with Victor it's like, oh, you know, he's created this thing and he's a madman and he just can't cope with essentially the actions of his consequences. He becomes this big bad. And I think it's particularly in terms of how the film then plays out as we get towards these final scenes, it's interesting that there is this sort of like good and bad positioning for both of yes. them, because I don't know how well I think it functions in comparison to the way that the two exist in the book.
Yeah, it very much does simplify it into good guy versus bad guy.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like.
Yes. The creature attacks Victor, and hearing the commotion, Elizabeth finds the creature and lovingly embraces him. Victor fires upon the creature with a pistol, but inadvertently shoots Elizabeth. The creature leaves with her in his arms, mortally wounding William as they flee. Again, there's a lot of, I think, interesting visual language here. The creature is carrying Elizabeth in what's called, well, the bridal carry. Mm-hmm. And of course, she's in her bridal dress. They are being showered with flower petals as they flee the mansion. So it's very much symbolizing, I would say, their wedding, the mm-hmm. creature and Elizabeth wedding each other. Also, at first, I didn't particularly enjoy the design of Elizabeth's bridal dress. It mm-hmm. felt very bulky visually to me. But then a friend pointed out that the wraps on her arms were very referential to the Bride of Frankenstein in later movies. Oh, interesting.
Okay, yeah, I hadn't clocked
like,
that.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't either. And I was like, okay, I like it now.
Yeah,
I like
makes
the
sense.
wrap bandage arms for sure. One thing I didn't like about this scene, to call back to what we were just talking about, is that as William is dying, he says to Victor, "You are the monster."
Yeah.
I don't know if I could have eye rolled any harder, really.
It's a tough sell, isn't it? You don't need to say. I think it's like I just said, that positioning of the two, of Victor and the creature, feels already like good and bad. I don't think you need to belabor the fact that like, oh, Victor has become the monster after all, or like
Yes.
that is running throughout the whole film. So to have William have to speak it into existence while he's telling his brother that he, I've always, all the darkness in our lives has always come from you, etc., etc. It just felt a bit too on the nose.
Very on the nose. I feel like it did not need to be spelled out. And I always feel a little bit insulted when I feel like a filmmaker doesn't trust its audience to be smart. I feel like I was being treated like an idiot. Like, yeah, I get it, Guillermo. Like, I don't need
You're not leaving much subtext, are you? It's like you could
No.
have just sat there. You don't need to make it super, super obvious.
Yes, don't need a character to literally spell out who is the real monster.
One of the things, just thinking about Elizabeth's dress, actually, that I thought was really interesting in terms of like a visual callback, is when she is lying there in her bridal gown and you just see the way that the kind of the color of the red just starts to emerge across the dress. I thought that was really nice, and on second watch it obviously then for me just really tied back quite neatly to Victor's mother at the start and all of the clothing that she was wearing.
Absolutely. I found that to be a very effective image as well. Sometimes the pops of red to me just felt like, oh, hey, that looks cool, But in this instance, it certainly was a symbolic, thematic callback and therefore was very effective.
Yeah.
Yes, the creature takes Elizabeth to a cave where she dies very prettily after saying essentially that she loves him. And she says, better this way to fade with your eyes gazing upon me. So in my notes, I have written barf, which is maybe a little bit harsh, but yeah, I just can't get on board with the monster romance in this case. I'm sorry.
There was a point where I think Elizabeth is telling him when he's carried her to the cave, she tells him that she knows that she wasn't meant for this world. And I think it's something along the lines of like, oh, she sought something that she couldn't name, but in him she found it. Like, and that is love. Yeah, that was the point at which I thought like the monster romance was very heavy-handed. And I'm not sure if I felt like it was working particularly.
I do think my reception to this scene and interpretation of it would have been more charitable if not for the fact that I have read and quite enjoy the novel, because in the novel, the creature kills Elizabeth just as revenge upon Victor. So I realize that is not the case nor the context in this movie. He didn't kill her. He's not responsible for her death. But just having that foreknowledge, it made it feel a little icky to me, but I understand. That's just what I bring to the viewing of the film. It's not necessarily the film's fault.
I think it is the difficulty of when you are adapting something that has such a rich history as Frankenstein. I think obviously you could say that about all of the adaptations over the years of how they do and don't adhere to the novel, but it's really hard to not bring with you that kind of contextual baggage, isn't it, when you know the book and you know what the way that the plot functions, particularly when you've got instances like that are a complete 180 almost to what is happening in the book. Whether he kills or not kills, those are quite different choices that the character makes.
And I really try not to be a novel purist for any novel, because adapting from one medium to another, certain changes just simply have to be made, and what may serve the written word isn't going to work on screen. So I really do try not to be a purist, especially as you said, when it is such a 180, like this is a totally different relationship between the creature and Elizabeth. So I don't know why I couldn't divorce myself from the book more successfully than I can in other cases. Maybe it's just because I didn't feel like the romance was earned quite in the movie.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to contemplate, isn't it? I think it is. It's just that it's such a personality shift for the creature itself, and I think that's quite an interesting choice that he's made, as I've said, and but it's also quite hard to get on board with.
So from that moment on, Victor single-mindedly devotes his life to hunting down the creature, chasing him to the edges of the earth to the Arctic. Now caught up to the present, back aboard the ship, Victor apologizes to the creature for his cruelty, realizing he had become too much like his own father. The creature forgives Victor as he dies. Going back to what I was saying about how Del Toro brings this idea of generational trauma to this adaptation, which is maybe not something that's been explored in other Frankenstein movies. This comes full circle in this scene, obviously, but also in the sense of forgiving those who have wronged you, whether that's a parent or someone else. And also, surely in order to actually live fully, one must forgive people who have wronged them. I think it was an okay button on the theme.
Yeah, it's a sort of, there's so much within the film, isn't there, about parenthood and not just the parenthood that Victor finds himself kind of forcibly within when he's made this creature that he obviously ends up having fatherly relationship toward. But like you say, that kind of the generational trauma and everything. Yeah, it did feel like when he did refer to him as being my son and having that sort of this conversation at the end, it did feel a little bit like tying a neat bow on it somewhat. I didn't mind the scene at the end. I didn't mind the conversation. It's sort of interesting that prior to that they do just have this sort of, they're basically chasing each other to the end of the earth. I think it was really one of the most striking scenes that I liked from a sort of a visual cinematography sense, is when you have Victor, when he's set up his camp on the ice and you see it from a distance and you see with the sun behind him and he's got his dogs and he's obviously this is a person that's just been driven to like the literal end of the earth because he's obviously because of this antagonistic relationship that he has with this thing that he created, and they're sort of both trying to kind of mutually kill each other, but also it's a weird adversarial relationship that they have, don't they? It's this sort of back and forth. And yeah, there's a sort of a sense that obviously like Victor's gone through all this deep trauma of watching, the woman that he loves die, his brother dies, lost his entire, all his family, everything, all his work is just completely gone to pot. This is the thing that he's going to put his energies into. Then he realizes he just can't, actually, I just need to draw a line under it. Yeah, it felt very neat.
I agree that it felt neat. I would say maybe a little too neat, although I do think ultimately I agree with you that I felt satisfied in this resolution to this theme going throughout the movie. However, if we look at it in universe, as you said, Victor's been driven literally to the edges of the earth. He's got nothing left in his life, essentially. He's out for revenge. And then within the context of the movie, he's boarded the ship after hunting down the monster for I think about 2 years now. And then the creature comes on board, tells his side of the story, and then Victor's like, oh yeah, you're right. Never mind. I'm sorry. It's like, wait, that was an awfully quick about face for Victor.
It's a fascinating resolution. And I think, a funny conclusion for him to come to. I guess I don't know it feels like a conclusion he inevitably had to make when you have a creature that essentially can stand and hold dynamite and blow himself up and just like won't die. So it's ultimately like, what's the outcome going to be here? He's going to kill you before you can kill him because he physically cannot die. So it is just very funny, isn't it? That he was just like, yeah, I guess. Like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And so one of us needs to put an end to this, and I'm just going to do this because I'm far too injured and I unfortunately can't bounce back from this in the way that you can.
Yeah, I think inevitable is a good way to put it. After Victor dies, the creature then frees the ship from the ice. The captain, too, abandons his own reckless pursuit. Taking Victor's cautionary tale to heart, he tells his crew that they are returning home. The creature watches the ship sail toward the sunrise, reaching out to embrace the sunlight as Victor once taught him, tears in his eyes. The end. Though not entirely the end, there is also a quote from Lord Byron that reads, "And thus the heart will break, yet brokenly live on," in which I had once again in my notes, barf, Mary Shelley who? We're going to have a quote from Lord Byron and not from Mary Shelley, excuse me.
It's really funny. One of the criticisms I have seen of this film is that decision to make that the end title card, because obviously the book is written by a woman, a young woman, no less, and is very trailblazing for that reason.
Yes.
So to end with a film that is obviously like largely about men and men doing things.
Yes.
And obviously, you know, there are themes of creating life, and it's inevitable that knowing that the novel itself comes from a woman's perspective, like there's lots there that, you know, is not things that other people haven't talked about at length over the years. But it's just very funny. It's just to sort of go like, no, we're going to end with a Byron quote. One very charitable reading I did see in response to that was like, well, she would have loved that because she liked Byron. But it's like, it could have just been quite nice to put the cap on the fact that it was, you know, written by a woman.
Yes. I have to say, it really did cheese me off that was the ending of the movie. It is also, though, at the same time, quite fascinating to me that we did get such a male movie from such a female text.
It's really funny it's something that I've reflected on, I think, quite a lot, particularly on my second rewatch. I think when I saw it at the cinema, I think I was sort of dazzled by it, and the length of it. I think by the time I got to the end of it, I was just sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, quite a lot going on there, quite a lot to process. But when I rewatched it, it did feel very boy heavy, to be blunt. It's just very, and I think it's, you know, when you do think about sort of the changes that have been made to the Elizabeth character, like you've said, and I'm not wholly sure that character works in the context of this film. I think Mia Goth, like you've said, I think does an amazing job with the material that she has. And I think that she's the right actress for the job, to be honest, because I think that she just has the mannerisms of, and her acting abilities just feel very right for this particular character. But on my second rewatch, I was just like, oh, it's just really odd that, you know, it sort of just feels very, very male.
It truly does, yes. I think that leads us nicely into talking more generally what we thought about the movie. So yeah, now that we've reached the end of the film, what were your overall impressions? Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it?
I think going into it, I think I was really concerned. I'd seen some initial flurry of reviews, particularly out of the film festivals, that it was not particularly great, and I do try not to let those things cloud my judgment, because I do think it's ultimately incredibly subjective, isn't it? But I was concerned I was going to not like it at all. I think it is objectively fine. I had a perfectly good time watching it. I really felt the length of it on second watch, and I can't tell if that's just largely because I was at home and I, you know, just had the distractions of my house, and also I was able to check how long was left. Obviously when you're in the cinema, beyond like checking my watch, that I can't physically, you know, get a time check on where we're at in the runtime, but I felt the length of it a lot more at home. And obviously because I was looking at it in a kind of more of an analytical perspective, I think there were parts of it where I was like, you could just cut this out, this doesn't feel like it's gaining anything.
Yes,
like we've already said, I think that it's not very, it's the subtext is about as subtle as a sort of bag of the bricks to the head at sometimes. It feels very laboured, but I like how camp it is. Like I've said, I think I thought a lot about the Oscar Isaac performance particularly. I think he is great. I think the thing I always find with Oscar Isaac, having watched the majority of his filmography, good and bad, at this stage, I always think he is one of the best things in anything.
I agree. Like Star Wars.
Yeah, he always brings, you know, I've watched some absolute nonsense films with him in, but he always, you know, is doing the best of his ability even when it's not great. That's not what I'm saying in the context of this film, but I think his performance is particularly campy. It's very good. I loved all of the Del Toro's set pieces, like we've said. I think the house, particularly the house at the start, and then the water tower, all of that, it's those set pieces that you hope for when you go to a Del Toro film. So I was pleased that they were there. And obviously the monster looking for love, that just feels like very Del Toro box ticking. I also just think, and I know we've briefly touched upon it, but it just feels very Del Toro to turn the creature into a sympathetic, tragic figure, rather than embracing him as the monstrous antagonist that, you know, you could argue he is. There's so much in there symbolism wise, you know, and I think, like we've been saying, I'm just so intrigued as to why he made particular choices to change things from the book's narrative. So yeah, I think I think I found it interesting to think about in the context of analysing it from the perspective of, you know, the conversation we've been having. I wouldn't necessarily I'd place it especially high in my Del Toro rankings, but it ultimately feels like a Guillermo del Toro film, and that's sort of what I wanted out of it, to be honest.
I'm very much in agreement with what you've said here. I certainly liked this movie. I didn't love it. I do also feel that I liked it less upon second watching, which is a little bit disappointing. And in fact, even my first go around, I was really bought in the beginning. I was like, this is great. I love what the energy that Oscar Isaac is bringing. I love how this looks. But even that first time as the movie went on, it did feel a little laborious to get to the end. And by the time it did finally trudge to the finale, I was like, man, I'm even more exhausted than Victor is. Like, let's wrap this up. You know? Yeah, which is disappointing, because at first I thought, oh, this is a movie I'm going to rewatch over and over. As you said, maybe not in the highest ranking in the hierarchy of Del Toro films. Also, what you said, though, it is very firmly a Del Toro film. It delivered on what I would assume everyone's expectations were for it as far as the Del Toro-ness goes. You know, I feel like it was very dead dove, do not eat. I don't know what I was expecting.
Yeah, you can tell it's a real passion project for him. And I think it's really hard to not view it in the context of knowing that it's taken him, you know, a really significant amount of time to get to the point where he is able to make it. And you can tell that it's coming from the place of someone that is obviously an enthusiast for the story itself and wants to put his spin on it. I think it's just interesting to think about, like, what new is it bringing to the table in the context of Frankenstein and the creature as characters, which you don't necessarily always have to think about, but I think it's just inevitable when you have got something that is so steeped not only in literary history but also in cinematic history.
Yes, it very much delivers the Del Toro version of Frankenstein. Yeah. Will that turn out to be memorable in the pantheon of Frankenstein movies decades from now? I would say maybe not. If Del Toro had made this Frankenstein movie 20 plus years ago, as he had always wanted to, if it had come earlier in his career when his work was still relatively unknown to American or to wider audiences, then I think it perhaps could have made a bigger impact. As you said, it is very clearly a passion project, which I think is its strength at the end of the day. I was a little bit wary because when filmmakers do have passion projects that they have been obsessing over for decades, I feel like it can either turn out brilliantly or very poorly, because when a director is so close to a story, they often tend to be more hesitant to kill their darlings.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's a slight inability to want to be able to kind of like make any amendments or change things so significantly when you've been clinging on to it for such a long time, isn't there?
Yes. It is very Del Toro. It is very much that tragic monster myth. I feel like he still could have been a little bit more faithful to the book and delivered the tragic monster tale, because the creature in the book is a tragic, sympathetic, pitiable character, even though he does do awful things that are kind of unforgivable. But still, all that being said, the creature in the book is, you know, he is a victim of society and of being abandoned and rejected. And to quote the book, he says, "I am malicious because I am miserable." He's not evil. He's not bad. And he's not good either. There's so much more nuance in the novel, whereas this is very black and white and red.
Yeah, completely. I think it's really interesting to think about what you said about if it had come earlier in his career. I think there would be, perhaps, particularly because of the decision he's made to make the creature, you know, far more amped up from a sympathetic and tragic point of view. I think if it came earlier in his filmography, I think there would be probably less of a tendency to make those comparisons to things that have come before. I think that I did keep mentally thinking about the relationship in The Shape of Water, particularly.
Yes.
And it's not to say that I think it did the film a disservice, but I do think it's just interesting to think, well, if it had come actually earlier on when he'd wanted to make it, you know, I think that just wouldn't be happening. I wouldn't be thinking about like, oh, this is just really, you know, like this is a more of a, The Shape of Water is a contemporary telling of that story. It's hard to not view it through that lens.
I agree. Have you seen Del Toro's Pinocchio?
I actually haven't, no.
I haven't either, but I am more interested to watch it now because I've heard people call Del Toro's Pinocchio a better Frankenstein story than his own Frankenstein story. So I'm curious to see what is meant by that.
It's interesting to think about how I think that obviously because he's had such a fondness for the story, I do think that you could look back at a lot of his films and kind of go like they are all Frankensteins in a way. So even to do Pinocchio in that capacity, I think is interesting.
Yes. I'd say my final thoughts perhaps are much like the creature itself. There are a bunch of nicely assembled parts, but where is the soul? Where is the soul of this movie? I don't know where it is. I couldn't find it.
I think it's a film full of like very great performances. I don't think I could ultimately fault anyone in it, to be honest. You know, I think that
True.
I was very surprised by Jacob Elordi. He's an actor that I like, but I don't think about his acting abilities very often. I don't think I've really seen him in a huge amount, to be honest. He's just a figure that just sort of exists for proximity of having spent a lot of time on the internet. You know, he's just always there. But I was very surprised by the physicality of his performance, to be honest, because for a lot of it he's largely silent. He's not saying a huge amount, so it's you are reliant on the physical side of stuff. And yeah, Oscar Isaac was great. You know, like you said at the start, it's always great to see Christoph Waltz.
Yes.
Mia Goth does a good job. So it's a lot of moving parts that I think work, but the whole thing as an entity just, you know, perhaps doesn't.
I also quite enjoyed Jacob Elordi's performance. He doesn't have much dialogue, as you were saying, and for a good part of the movie, all he says is Victor, and the fact that he is able to inflect such different meaning and emotion to just that one word, I feel says a lot about his acting ability. I took a look at Jacob Elordi's IMDb page because honestly, I'm ashamed to say I don't think I have seen him in anything else. I haven't seen Euphoria. I haven't seen Saltburn yet, although I would very much like to. So I have to give kudos to this film at least for making me want to seek out more of Jacob Elordi's work for sure.
It's just such a contrast to anything else he's been in. And I do think it's interesting to think about what the role of the creature would have been like if it had been Andrew Garfield. That's something that I keep rolling over in my head, actually, is just like what Garfield would have brought to the table in that role.
Mm-hmm. I could see him making it work for sure. I think I'd have to see the entire movie to say which I thought was the better casting. Do you have any other favorite adaptations of the Frankenstein story or reimaginings of the Frankenstein story?
Oh, wow. It's very indicative of where my head is at, that the first thing that springs to mind is Frankenweenie, the Tim Burton. I think it's because we've just been talking about, we've been talking about Tim Burton. No, I do actually wish that I had rewatched some. I did debate actually in the build up to seeing the film whether it would have been sensible for me to rewatch some of the ones that have come before. It's really interesting to think about Frankenstein actually as a character for me, because I know for a lot of people he holds this like very nostalgic, cherished position in terms of like, you know, horror sort of creatures. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously like the Boris Karloff version of it, I think for all of us, I think that's just when you say Frankenstein, that's what springs to mind.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? I really wish that I had rewatched the Kenneth Branagh, the 1994 adaptation. I can't say whether I think it's an effective adaptation or not, but I do think that De Niro as Frankenstein is just like, it's just a funny thing to think about it having happened.
Yes.
It just feels like a role that just seems so at odds to the way that De Niro, just the rest of De Niro's career. It's just really funny to just remind ourselves that like, oh, actually, yeah, no, he has played Gratula at some point.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know, I just think that the Boris Karloff, you know, the original kind of rendering of it, that just it almost set the bar too high, I think.
Very high.
Yeah.
It really is held up in cinema history not only is like a good creature feature, but just, you know, a pretty exemplary movie in general, period. Yeah, it's a high bar to have to live up to. My favorite adaptation probably is a production by the National Theatre that starred Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller.
I haven't seen it, but I've always heard such great things about it.
Yes, so this came out in 2011. It was directed by Danny Boyle. And when it was performed live, Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller swapped roles night to night. So one night, Benedict Cumberbatch was Victor, and then next night he was the creature. So they played dual roles, which I found very interesting. Honestly, I can't remember which way I saw it on the filmed version, but either way, it was an excellent production, I thought. I also have to give a shout out to Young Frankenstein by Mel Brooks.
Yep.
Classic.
Frankenstein. Yep. I kept thinking that any time you hear Frankenstein, I think, no, it's Frankenstein.
Oh, of course. And a looser adaptation, but I would say still an adaptation, Poor Things, from just a couple years ago.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think about Yorgos in the context of Frankenstein, I think, particularly.
Yeah, so time will tell whether this Frankenstein goes down with the rest in cinematic history. So now it is time to play the game and tally up the points and find out who won. Okay, first up, we both guessed Chekhov's prosthetic leg. This was just funny to me. It's like, of all the things that Del Toro decided he needed to add to his adaptation.
I think it's just the way that we were both instantly like, yeah, this has to mean something. This is going somewhere. Yeah.
So yes, the movie did revisit this one, so I'll be rewarding points for that. Next was your guess, Chekhov's Oedipal complex. I feel like this is a little debatable. I think it might fall more in the thematic through line than being a Chekhov's gun. I feel like Chekhov's gun is usually something a little bit more concrete, but I do want to award partial points because you're certainly correct that there was, you know, some Oedipus themes going on there very, very strongly, both textually and just, you know, casting the same woman as his mother and his would-be lover. In
retrospect, I think I just regret not just saying Chekhov's dead mother. Yes. Because that's ultimately, isn't it? It's the crux of it. But yeah.
It's true. My next guess was Chekhov's cane. This did not have a payoff, which I'm super disappointed about. Subtracting points. The next guess was yours, Chekhov's mysterious secret. This was Harlander's mysterious alluded to secret that Victor would not want to make good on his promise to fulfill a favor. So that certainly came back. Next was Chekhov's niece, in which you said you predicted that Elizabeth would be a bit of a wrench in the works for Victor.
It's a slight understatement, isn't it? A slight wrench in the works for him. Yeah. She derailed the whole thing.
She did derail the whole thing. Broke his poor heart, apparently. And finally, we both guessed the very OSHA non-compliant Chekhov's giant hole in the floor.
They should have just put some guardrails around it. It could have been
some guardrails,
all avoidable.
Maybe an orange cone or two. If you'll give me just a moment to calculate the points. Beep, boop, beep. Okay, I have a total of 4 points. And April, you are our winner with a whopping 12 points. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Bravo.
This is my crowning achievement for the month. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Although I suspect that your power ranking of Del Toro's monster hotness rating is perhaps your ultimate achievement this month, maybe.
Yeah, I'm going to have to publish that somewhere, aren't I? Just to prove it exists. I'll have to go away and do some more hardened thinking.
I would love to see it. And everyone, please do keep an eye on April's Substack. April, what else would you like to plug? Where can the listeners find you?
You can find me on Letterboxd if you wish to see more of my thoughts about the things that I am watching. You can find me there. I'm April HM, all one word.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, April. I had an excellent time.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been really lovely to talk about Del Toro's long-awaited project.
And listeners, thank you again for listening. If you could please like and subscribe on YouTube, that would really help me out. And if you're already watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment about what your favorite Frankenstein adaptation is. And until next time, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Chekhov's Whatever. Go to chekhovswhatever.substack.com to follow along with the podcast. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a positive review. You can also find video clips and full audio episodes on YouTube, so be sure to like and subscribe at Chekhov's Whatever. And finally, you can send email to chekhovswhateverpodcast@gmail.com. All right, let's end this show with a bang.